Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. If you've listened to the previous episodes, you're probably well aware of the massive computer issues I've had in the last couple of weeks. I'm not going to go back into them tonight, which is the reason for the delay in the live communism. It's being pushed back to probably mid-year at this stage. I'm hoping for an end of May, June release date at this stage. I'll keep you informed, however, so if you'd like to stay in the loop and find out all the details of the live communism and everything else that's happening with the show, please subscribe to the Truth Tank Instagram page. I'm most active on there, and you'll find all the latest updates on the show via Instagram or Facebook, but mainly Instagram. This is another weekly Tank episode. The first weekly Tank episode I put out was on Disney scaling back their physical media sales in the Southern Hemisphere and the general cuntiness of streaming services. This is the second weekly Tank, and it's going to be a film review. I promise it's only going to be a short one. It's not going to be as long as the actual film that I'm reviewing. The film we'll be looking at tonight will be the Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown, directed by James Mangold, starring Timothee Chalamet, Elle Fanning, Edward Norton, and Boyd Holbrook. So, without further ado, let's get into tonight's show. This is episode 70 of The Truth Tank, A Complete Unknown film review.
G'day. Don't skip. Let me interrupt the podcast that you're currently listening to with some blatant self-promotion. What do you get when you mix two Aussie mates, a splash of booze, well, more than a splash, and some microphones? You get Cheers Big Ears, hosted by myself, the Chad, and my mate Matt, and sometimes, but more often than not now, my missus Bobby. It's a podcast of adult beverages and not-so-adult conversation. It's not serious, far from it. Well, except for that one episode, but that was just that one. We're available wherever you get your podcast fix. Cheers, Big Ears.
A Complete Unknown is a biopic about the early life of Bob Dylan, specifically his early years in the early 1960s, moving to New York City, finding himself as a young, struggling musician, going right through to his rebellious, revolutionary, and defiant transition into playing electric music. And at the time, electronic music was not like electronic dance music as we know it. It was basically electric guitar and what we'd think of as a modern band. If you don't know, Bob Dylan was a folk artist. Well, he's kind of a mashup. Well, I shouldn't say mashup. He's a unique artist. He's blended many genres. He plays music that he likes, and I've liked artists like that who don't get stereotyped into one category. Some of the best bands I can think of haven't been stereotyped, and yeah, that's a gift and a curse. A lot of bands, like especially heavy metal bands that tend to change and go a different direction, cop a lot of criticism from their fans because they kind of want the same old thrashy kind of metal sound. Like Metallica copped a lot of backlash after the Black Album, especially in the 90s. Yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, it wasn't the best of Metallica, but it's better than Saint Anger. And I've always respected bands that can change genres or do different styles and still pull it off, especially like a heavier band or a band that you're really into and they have one or two albums that are kind of similar, or they switch not so much genres but kind of styles around. Like Trivium has done this. They started off as kind of a screamo metalcore band. The first album and EP was very metalcore, lots of screaming lyrics. Third album was more thrash metal. Fourth album was his big epic sounding combination of thrash metal with a bit of screamo in it. The verses were more metalcore and screaming, where the choruses were more melodic. But they make it work. They are very good at those two styles. Another band I was really into, I still do like, Avenged Sevenfold. They've changed. They were pretty much like a screamo, not hardcore, but more screamo metalcore band. Their third album, one of my favourite albums of all time, City of Evil, was this kind of mashup of heavy metal, hard rock, jazzy sounding melodic guitar solos, big power ballads, 10-minute progressive metal songs. Very original, one of my favourite albums. Like the first three songs, Beast and the Harlot, Burn It Down, I think it's about like 15 minutes of music. And fucking fantastic. Bat Country. Fourth album, it gets a bit heavier, not as good as the third one. They've changed. I think the last album was very progressive, not my favourite. They haven't really gone back and listened to it. They tried something different. In my opinion, it didn't quite work out. It was a bit too, I think, off the cuff, but they tried something different. Whether it worked or not, it's still good music. Back to Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's definitely one of those artists who has never been defined by a certain genre or style. He more or less started as a folk singer, then turned electric, and a bit of country, a bit of blues, a little bit of influence of British rock and the early days of rock and roll. Then he went a bit more gospel, adding piano and a few more instruments, but never really lost that core of who he was as an artist. Some artists can do it very well, others it backfires badly and kills their career. But back to the film. A Complete Unknown focuses on the early years of Bob Dylan's life, from the early 1960s to the late 60s, and that tumultuous transition to electric. It's the first film that I've seen in 2025. I saw it pretty much when it came out. Bob Dylan's played by Timothee Chalamet, who I think delivers one of the year's best performances. He was outstanding as Bob Dylan. I completely believed he was him. He talked like him, he walked like him, he played the guitar like him, he looked like him. He even sung better than Bob Dylan, I think. Yeah, it's a bit sacrilegious to say, but Bob Dylan has a very unique voice. It's not the best sounding musical voice. You wouldn't call him the greatest singer of all time, and I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan. I've loved Bob Dylan since I was a kid. I was really looking forward to this film, especially when I found out James Mangold was directing and Chalamet was playing Bob Dylan. So I'm very familiar with Bob Dylan's work and his voice, and what makes a Bob Dylan song unique is once you hear it sung by Bob Dylan, because sometimes his voice can take a little while to warm up to in some of his songs. It's more so the middle part of his musical career and the later stuff. He's a bit more rawer in the younger days, but the point I'm trying to make is when you hear a Bob Dylan song and you hear that raspy, gravelly, very unique sounding voice that is Bob Dylan, once you hear a Bob Dylan sung like that, it's impossible not to hear it sung that exact same way. And that's why there's very few good covers of Bob Dylan songs, because he's so unique. And the other overlooked factor is Bob Dylan is one of the greatest poets, I think, of the 20th century. I mean, his lyrics make you think. They're not like the traditional song. They don't always rhyme, but it's like this abstract, poetic rhyming. They don't always flow, but they fit. And Bob Dylan's been a big influence of mine going into podcasting. That kind of sounds weird to say. And I try to do that with the way I write episodes and the way I do titles. I like to have like a rhyming titles, as you probably picked up, those long 80s action movie style titles. Sometimes I like to have the letters of the title all be the same, start with the same letter. Or I like to throw it off and make it a little bit abstract. I'm not comparing myself to Dylan in any way, shape or form. That's just something I really like about the way he writes and structures his songs. So he's a abstract poet in a way. And I think the film does really well is it breaks down the writing process of Bob Dylan. A lot of musical biopics tend to focus either just on the music or one or several of the artists. Like Bohemian Rhapsody, that's a good movie. I haven't watched it again. I've never felt like watching it again after I saw it in the movies. Great performance by Rami Malek. But that movie is more about Freddie Mercury than it is about Queen. Yeah, there's elements of the writing and recording process that all the biopics tend to have. But I thought, especially the second half, was pretty much just about Freddie Mercury. The best part of that film is the recreation of the Live Aid concert from the 80s. One musical biopic I didn't like was Rocket Man. It's a good movie. I was thinking to myself the other day, someone should make an Elton John film, and then I remembered, oh yeah, that's right, they did. It's not really that memorable. I remember it being really weird and quirky. It was kind of like he's in therapy or something like that, and it's kind of like this weird, dreamlike version of his life. I didn't particularly like that one. James Mangold's other musical biopic, Walk the Line, was really good. Joaquin is brilliant as Johnny Cash, and who doesn't like Johnny Cash? A very interesting guy who is also in this film. Well, my favourite musical biopic is Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. That was fantastic. It was colourful and vibrant. It was very different to the typical biopic. It really did a good job of recreating the time period through the cars and stuff, and all the scenes in between the main scenes of, like, downtown, or cars going down the streets and stuff like that. It really encapsulated that time period, and it kept the story moving along. You didn't have to flash 1970 across the screen. You could tell what decade it was by the cars and the clothes, and Austin Butler was fantastic in that film. Timothee Chalamet and Austin Butler are both forces of nature. They're going to be the most dominant male actors of their generation. I love Austin Butler and Timothee Chalamet, and they both just happen to be in one of my favourite films, Dune Part 2. One's played Elvis, one's played Bob Dylan, both complete opposite individuals, different artists, but both very iconic. Timothee Chalamet, I was very impressed with his portrayal of Bob Dylan. He's one of those three-dimensional actors. He has a physical presence. He can change the voice and the look and the mannerisms. And one thing I loved about the film is just the way he talks like Bob Dylan, out the side of his mouth, and really low and kind of mumbly. Sometimes you can't really even understand what he says. He also doesn't make a lot of eye contact with other people. The film kicks off with Bob coming to New York and finding his way to Greenwich Village. I love the time period, the cars and the costumes and the backgrounds and stuff. You could tell the backgrounds were probably a bit CG because it was obviously cheaper to do. But they recreated the old 60s streets of New York, all the grime and the filth and the phone boxes, old cars, and people selling shit on the street. It had a real cool atmosphere to it. And shout out to my cousin Rebecca, who worked on A Complete Unknown. She is a visual effects artist. I won't say for who, but she worked on this film, and I tried to find her name in the credits, but they were going too fast and I didn't quite see them. So shout out to her. That's a very cool achievement. So he's in a bar reading a paper, and there's a story about one of his heroes, Woody Guthrie, played by Scoot McNairy, who again has an exceptional performance in this film. He finds out he's in a hospital. He asks around where someone says, "Yeah, it's a hospital, buddy. That's in Jersey." He replies, "Yeah, I just came from there." He goes, "Well, you better go back there." So Bob makes a trek back to the hospital to find his hero, where he has a chance encounter with Pete Seeger, played by Edward Norton. I haven't seen Edward Norton in a film in a while. He was also exceptional. I mean, Edward Norton's been one of the greatest actors for the past 20 years. So he goes to the hospital to meet his idol. He finds Pete. He explains who he is and that he's a folk singer. He's been writing songs. Woody wants to hear one. He plays a song, and this is pretty early into the film, not to give too much away. He plays a song and he blows them both away. It was really cool hearing those songs in a theatre with the theatrical sound, seeing it on the big screen. All the songs are sung by the cast members. Timothee Chalamet sings. It also looks like he plays guitar in it as well. There's a couple of scenes where characters are strumming a guitar and you can tell it's a visual effects hand. My cousin might have animated that part. But for the most part, it's pretty convincing. Like, I've been playing guitar for fucking 12, 15 years or so. And just the finger work and the way they played all seemed very legit. There's a lot of scenes with putting capos on the necks of guitars and sliding them down, which is very cool. If you're a guitar nerd, you're probably going to love this film. It's all the old 60s instruments. There's this cool old semi-hollow Epiphone guitar, which was accurate too because he's a blues musician. Epiphone's the Gibson's budget model. If you couldn't afford $6,000 for a Les Paul custom, you got the Epiphone. Especially myself being a guitar player, seeing that, like the attention to detail that's gone into it and the effort they've gone to make it look and sound real, where some movies you can tell they're just like strumming nothing and they're dubbing the sound over the top of it. So they're both impressed by the young Bob. Woody Guthrie has Huntington's disease. He's kind of like in a stroke-like state. He is bed or chair ridden. He can't talk. He can't really use his hands all that well anymore. So from there, Bob goes to live with Woody. He gets introduced to the New York music scene. Woody's a folk player and he's trying to promote folk on a national and global scale and get the recognition it deserves. He sees the talent in Bob right away, From there, he plays the club circuit, which is another element I really loved about this film, seeing all the old bars and clubs. The set decoration, the attention to detail, the lighting is all superb in this film. It really feels like you've walked into like a 1960s like music bar. It's very, not like sleazy in the modern sense. It kind of looks run down. Lots of dark lighting. There's a small stage, just some tables, people watching. And that's how you kind of made your bones. You just moved around from club to club. There's a cool scene with the underground club. I can't remember what it was called. Bob's playing down there. And it reminds me of some of the places I used to go to see live music. You know, like a 200-300 person capacity venue, just a live stage watching live music. It's an art form that unfortunately I think in the modern day is becoming lost. It's very hard and expensive to start a band, and with people's schedules and venue costs and stuff like that, it's not as a common occurrence as it used to be. Concerts now are costing more than ever. But it was very cool to see that slice of history. Bob plays his first gig at an open mic night after Joan Baez, I think it's Baez, played by Monica Barbaro. And there's a bit of tension between these two. Once again, another great performance. She's got an incredible voice too. Everyone sings in this film. She's got this really high voice. So she goes up there before Bob. She's played her set. She's got this kind of arrogance about her, a bit of an air of superiority. She goes to leave and he goes up on the stage after he's been introduced by Woody and says, "Oh, how about that, Joan?" And she turns around and looks at him and watches his set and hears him play, and then comes to the same conclusion that everybody else does, that, yeah, he's the real deal. She was just going to leave. So from there he moves in with Sylvia, played by Elle Fanning. He meets her at a folk recording session set in a church, which is really cool. They hit it off, and this is where we get this glimpse into Bob's writing process. There's a lot of focus on him writing in notebooks, jotting down things. There's scenes where he wakes up and starts writing. It's like he eats, breathes, and sleeps music. It's like his entire being is writing lyrics and creating music, and him figuring out the chords of the guitar, and I really loved that part of it. As I was saying before, some musical biopics focus on the music or the artist or an individual. This obviously focuses on the individual and people in Bob Dylan's life around this time period. But it also, as I mentioned before, focuses on the process of the writing, which I really enjoyed and found interesting. It's not so much about coming up with a hit song and what was happening in his life, what he was thinking about, relationships, things like that. And I really loved the apartment. He's in this apartment for a good chunk of the film, 3F, and it overlooks the street, and he's looking out the window with the world around him. And it's almost like this viewing platform where he's taking everything in and writing it down, and the relationship he's in with Sylvia and the fling he has with Joan while she's away. And there's this big rivalry between these two. They go on tour and they don't quite get along. They have a intimate affair, a brief one. Sylvia doesn't find out about it, but there's this attraction between him and Joan. They finally do the deed, and I think she's trying to figure him out the whole time, like how he comes up with the words and stuff, because she's kind of established. She's selling lots of records, but she's still doing the local gig scene. It was a vastly different time to how it is now, where if you're a popular artist, you seem to get like $1 million and you're everywhere. Back then, even if you were selling records, you still had to work and do the local gig circuit and go play at all the clubs and stuff like that. You didn't seem to like earn the big bucks and move into a mansion. Bob's making money. He's got his first album out, but he's still living in this apartment, still living this kind of day-to-day existence, and that's also reflected through the costumes too. The costumes in this are great. Lots of vintage Levi's, which I got a kick out of. Bob's Sherpa jackets, the old original looking Levi's Sherpa, the jeans, the hat he has. The clothes start off a bit baggy, and as he becomes more successful and as the movie progresses, everything becomes a bit more tailored and a bit tighter looking. His hair becomes more scraggly, more artistic. I really did like that part of it as well. There's also a lot of smoking in this film. It must have been hard to get past the censors in this day and age. Bob's pretty much smokes a majority of the film, because he used to smoke when he played, as did a lot of guys and girls at that time. As I was saying, the fling between these two doesn't really quite work out, and they don't become rivals, but it's during this time. There's a scene, she's making coffee, he literally gets up, starts writing a song. He doesn't seem to regard people's feelings or emotions in quite high esteem. He offends a lot of people. I think he's so locked into the songwriting process that he kind of overlooks people's feelings, or maybe he just didn't care. But he's like that. A lot of artists, you have to give something to get something. He's a bit abrupt and a little rude at some times, especially to people he's close to. But you see that kind of genius come through in the writing and the performing. All those great people throughout history have always had something a little odd or quirky about them. Oppenheimer was accused of being a communist. Da Vinci was pretty weird. All the great ones, especially artists, always have something quirky about them. P. Diddy, that kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? It's during this scene that he writes one of his biggest songs. I'm pretty sure it's Blowing in the Wind. And he writes it and she ends up singing it. So she's singing it on her album. She becomes known for it, but it's technically his song. His album isn't out yet. It's a bit weird because that doesn't happen that often now, where two artists have the same song, or someone writes a song for someone else but then also records it on their album. Because the big thing back then, where he recorded his first album, I think it's covers of folk songs, and then everything else after that he writes his own. There's a scene in the recording studio where someone says, "Who wrote that?" And the sleazy manager, Albert Grossman, played by Dan Fogler, replies, "He wrote it." And there seems to be a lot of disbelief that a guy this young, because he's only in his early 20s, he's like 21 or something like that. Everyone in the record business seems to be in disbelief that someone so young could write such impactful and poetic music. And that's what I loved about this movie. It focuses on that technical side and the heart and soul of the songwriting process, and how he came up with it. And it's not done in like an obvious way either. It's not like, he saw a bird then wrote a song. One of the offensive things he says to Joan, it's not Shakespeare and it's about flowers and something like that. She's a little offended by it, but I think deep down she knows that he's right. And he has a point. A lot of the music then, a lot of the pop songs were kind of basic, kind of very obvious. And even today, look at the pop songs. They're so fucking derivative. Let's go out and have fun on a fucking Friday night and party our brains out. Let's get drunk and do it all again type of shit. It's just meaningless fucking mediocre music that doesn't mean anything and won't be remembered in 50 years' time. Unlike Bob Dylan's work, which will be remembered throughout time. I mean, even his worst song, if you could say he even has one, is better than most people's entire catalogues. So he writes his song, they end up performing it later on in a duet during the concerts, but he hates doing it. He's got this thing where he wants to only play new music. He doesn't like playing old music. As he says in the film, all old music was once new music. You got to keep making new music and keep progressing, which is an interesting thing because most artists, people turn up to see them play the older stuff. I recently saw Iron Maiden end of last year, or September of last year. They played half from their new album, which I wasn't really familiar with. I only heard a couple of songs off of it. But you don't go to see like Iron Maiden to hear like the new stuff. You go to hear The Trooper and Run to the Hills, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Aces High. Think songs like that. It's like going to Metallica and not hearing Master of Puppets. Everyone loves the old classics, where Bob's philosophy was more play the new shit. I'm sick of playing the old stuff. I want to play the new songs, which kind of leads into the second half of the film and the whole conflict around him going electric. Because there's a big no-no in folk. Folk, you had to use acoustic, played banjo or acoustic guitar or semi-hollow body. You didn't play electric, as they quote-unquote call it, noise. I'm the younger generation of Bob Dylan fan, so I heard it all pretty much. I heard the folk, the country, the electric as one whole. Obviously, I wasn't born in the 60s, so I didn't grow up with the acoustic folk-only stuff, and I didn't grow up with just the electric side either. And that's what Mangold does really well in this film. He explains the writing process and this conflict between the acoustic and electric. He doesn't do it in an over-dramatic way either. It's very subtle. It's very ingrained in the story. And he does a great job of explaining the timeline and putting details in without just, flashing 1965 on the screen. I think only two dates in the entire film pop up, which is like 1960, I think 5 and 3. Sorry, there's 3 dates, and I think there's a 1968 or 9 towards the later half of the film. And some great scenes in the apartment where there's a TV. Bob and Sylvia will be watching it, or the TV will be on in the corner, and they'll have a news report about the Cuban Missile Crisis or JFK's assassination, MLK's assassination, or another iconic global event that happened during that time period, which is a really creative way of getting the time period across, because they have the actual news footage on the TV in the film, so it's whatever year or roughly what year of 1960 it's set in, without having to do the generic flash the date and stuff across the screen. There's another really good scene. There's a party. Bob Dylan's talking to some people. Sylvia and Joan are talking, and she goes over to his desk and starts going through his scrapbooks. He has a scrapbook because he used to work and live in a carnival and met a lot of eccentric characters, which he writes about in his music. She's thumbing through the scrapbook and it has his real name, Bob Zimmerman. And there's a scene earlier where he gets a notebook delivered and the postman says, "Are you Bob Zimmerman?" He's like, "Yeah," he signs for it. And so she starts looking at him as this imposter. She's looking for anything to kind of have a go at him at, or to try to discredit him as being a folk singer, because I think her career's taking off. She's pretty popular, and this guy might come and give her a run for her money, or even go even deeper and destabilize the folk movement, which comes into play a bit later. It just so happens he's like the prodigal son of folk and was the guy that was responsible for bringing folk music to the world, because I don't think there's been any real more popular folk figure than probably him and Johnny Cash and a couple of others. So she seems to get very jealous of his newfound success, and she's looking for this way to discredit him, like, "Oh, you didn't live in a carnival." He's like, "Yeah, I did." She just doesn't take him seriously or believe him. She's even trying to discredit his name, saying, "Oh, he doesn't use his real name, so that must mean everything about him is fake." Sylvia defends him. There's a good scene with him and Sylvia where she asks him about his past, and he says, "Well, what do you want to know that for? People lie about their past. They only tell you the stuff they want you to know, and pasts can be made up. What's important is the here and the now." So in that regard, he was very much ahead of his time. And going back to what I was saying about bad musical biopics, one of the fucking worst musical biopics I've seen was The Dirt on Netflix, the Motley Crue movie. I'm a massive Motley Crue fan. The Dirt is one of my favourite books. I've read that several times. That was my go-to book in the early 2000s when I was working at McDonald's. I used to read it every day on break, and this is back in the day when it'd take me 6 months to a year to read a single book. Back then I was proud of that fact. No one I was working with was reading much, so I thought that was a pretty decent accomplishment. So anyway, I found this book at a bookstore. I was really into Motley Crue. I heard this book was good. I read it cover to cover every day on break as the one escape I had from that monotonous, tedious hellhole of morning shift at McDonald's. I used to look forward to reading it on break before the hellish lunchtime onslaught started, as the only reprieve from that. I used to read it at night sometimes as well. That's when I first started getting into the habit of reading at night, which I have kept up all these years later. After I'd finished it, I just kept thinking about it, thinking, yeah, man, this would make a great movie. A few years later, I read it again. I've read the book a couple times. It's one of the few books I've read multiple times. Cover's all beat to shit. There's probably some grease stains on it somewhere. Some idiot I used to work with had grease all over his gloves and touched the book. I fucking nearly knocked him out. I had to sponge off the grease, which stained the page, because I'd never treat my books like that. Books are sacred. So anyway, when I heard that they were finally making the Dirt movie, because it's been on the cards for a very long time, Nicky Sixx always talked about it. He said someone had brought the rights and it was going into production. That never happened, so kind of like lost interest in it. Didn't think it would happen. Then I heard Jeff Tremaine, one of the directors and producers of the Jackass series, was directing it. It was on Netflix, and it was atrocious. There was parts of it that were good. The casting's pretty good. I think, the casting's probably the best part of the film. But they take several very dramatic parts from the movie that, if you've read the book, they don't really make sense because they're at different time periods. Because the book, it takes place over like a 20 or I think it's about a 30-year span, basically from when they were kids to pretty much the mid to late 90s or early 2000s, I think, when it was written. It's a very detailed book, and it's about 300 and something pages, 400 pages, so it's pretty good. It's just really like keyed into the facts and the storytelling. And back then in my hair metal days, it was pretty much the gospel. I absolutely loved it. I wanted to live that book. Seeing it come to life on the screen was very disappointing because it's only it's only an hour and 40 something minutes long, which is way too short. That movie needed to be like 3.5 hours at a minimum, or break it into 2 or 3 parts in the different decades, because you could make a 3-hour movie just on the 80s part of Motley Crue, because they're all very different and eccentric characters. The casting was great, especially Tommy Lee and Vince Neil. But like I was saying, they take some very dramatic key parts of that book and just kind of blend them together to try to come up with this coherent story that's supposed to take place over a 30-year time frame, and they compress that all into an hour and 43 minutes or something. Where this takes its time, it's very well laid out. There's a very clear vision straight from the start with a complete unknown, and I actually think I liked it more that it was a smaller, more manageable chunk of time. It's about 2 hours and 21 minutes. That it's from basically the early 60s to the late 60s. It's based on a book called Bob Goes Electric, which I have to read, which is basically that same time period. His early life, him becoming a folk singer, then ultimately going electric and causing this massive uproar in folk music, rather than trying to squeeze in a 50-year career in a 2.5-hour movie. And I think that works much better. The Elvis movie takes key elements of when he's a kid learning to sing in the gospel tents, and when he meets that country and western singer, and his love of superheroes. So that's important stuff they have to put into the film so you can understand parts of his personality later on, and the weird relationship he had with his mother and the dodgy manager. But it didn't need to cover every part of Elvis's life. It had him when he was really young. It didn't really have his teenage years. Then you meet him again when he's late teens, 20s, when he's discovered at a talent show. A Complete Unknown does the same thing. The opening scenes, not to give too much away, it's Bob in the back of a car travelling across the bridge, going back into New York. When you first see him, he's got a guitar case, a bag, a notebook, the clothes he has on his back, his hat, and he's trying to find his way through New York to try to find his idol. There's some funny scenes where Sylvia has to pay for movie tickets and dinner because she's the one that has the money. He doesn't. He doesn't have $2 to rub together. The movie does a very good job of, when you first see Bob Dylan, he's in his 20s, but you don't need to see the carnival stuff and the backstory when he's a kid, because it's already explained. It's already explained very interestingly through the scrapbook scene, where Joan's trying to figure out his backstory and try to discredit him for changing his name. And the first time we meet Bob, where he is in his life. He's a musician. He's trying to find his idol. He's basically just following his feet. He hasn't got an overarching grand plan, and he's kind of just living day to day and writing songs. You don't need a 25-minute montage of his entire life growing up. You kind of already figure that out, so you can get straight into the good stuff, him writing his hits. Like I said about the songwriting process, this film does a really good job of explaining the time period and the relationship to his songwriting. There's a cool scene where everyone's freaking out. Everybody's watching TV and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Everyone thinks they're going to get nuked. New York is going to be the first hit. Everyone's panicking. Everyone's trying to get out of the city. All the cabs are driving off. Joan wants to skip town and save herself. She's trying to get a taxi. They keep speeding off whenever they see someone. She hears someone playing a guitar and singing. She walks past this underground club, and there Bob is singing his new song about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there's like 300-400 people just transfixed on him, listening to every word he has to say. That's just a real creative way of explaining the time period. Then, the more successful he gets money. He makes a record deal. He goes to a party. It's supposed to be a party, for him or something like that. And everyone wants him to play his hit song, and he was just there to have a good time. He leaves the party. He's got this new girlfriend. He's split from Sylvia. He meets this guy in an elevator who's a guitarist in the band. And he goes, I wish they would all just fuck off or something. And he's like, who? And he's like, what? Who should fuck off? Because everyone that wants me to be this. He goes, I'm not a horse. I'm not carrying all their stuff. And the guy said something really philosophical. He looked at him, and he kind of, him saying that kind of changed his perspective. And then they go outside, and he goes, who are you? He goes, I'm this guitarist from this band. I'm playing up here. And he goes to the pub, checks this guy's band out, and he's got this cool electric sound that he's really getting into. And then someone spots him. There's a big altercation. But he ultimately gets this guy as his guitar player in his band. When he goes electric, he's kind of split from Woody at this time. He's starting to go his own way and develop this different sound and be more of this creative artist. So he starts to put together this electric band made of a bass player, guitar player, and a keyboard player, and another well-known hit is born. The guy that's playing the keyboard, he comes from another band. He's not a great guitar player. He goes, I just want to play. He goes, will you play guitar? And they've already got this great guitar player. And he kind of sneaks into a recording session, and he wants to play the keyboard, and the bass player turns it on. He couldn't figure out how to turn it on, so he turns it on and says, we're playing in the key of C. So he starts fucking around, and it's just before they record, and that becomes the intro to like a Rolling Stone, I'm pretty sure. There's another cool part. His career's taken off, and he gets this letter from one of his other idols, Johnny Cash, and they become pen pals, and they start writing each other. They're on different schedules on different sides of the country, so they haven't met, but they're doing a festival coming up, which is the first time they met, and that is the Norfolk Festival. So he performs at that festival. I can't remember the name of it. He plays with Joan. It's very cool. It's the way a festival should be. Seated. Everything's calm. No one's jumping around. You can get reasonably priced food and drink. Sit on the ground under a shade of a tree and enjoy the concert without going deaf or baking to death in the sun. There's a real cool recreation of that. And he's singing with Joan, and the tension between these two is heating up. They don't really like each other, but they're kind of forced to perform together. It's his song, but it's become kind of her hit single. So it's at this festival that Johnny and Bob finally meet and become BFFs. Dylan keeps writing and keeps producing hit after hit. His popularity grows, and this forces a huge split between him and Joan and him and Sylvia. Sylvia never finds out about the affair, but she kind of senses it. By watching him perform, she gets jealous and ultimately does a runner. And there is this really abstract love story in this film. I really find love stories really cliche and overdone at this point, but there's this bizarre love triangle. Kind of don't know who he's into. Kind of by the climax of the film, you sense that he actually really does love Sylvia, and Joan was just a distraction. When you look back at it, she was more into Bob to try to figure out his process rather than him as a person. Because Sylvia does a lot for him in the early years. She supports him, and ultimately they go their separate ways, but he comes back to her and reconnects. She's still living in the same apartment, and it's at this weird transitional point in the story. Bob's career is starting to take off. He's become a household name. There's a cool scene involving a public broadcast TV show. The show's hosted by his friend Woody. They've grown apart. He's supposed to do this show. He had to record, so he couldn't make it. And they had this blues musician, Jesse someone or other, I can't remember his name. Really cool character. Bob kind of crashes the live recording, and these three are all talking and playing. It's kind of like a proto-podcast in a way. It's public service TV. There's no huge advertisement. They're just talking about the technical side of guitar, and Jesse offers Bob his guitar. He goes, "Oh, I can't touch that. It's like touching your woman." He's like, "Well, I don't mind as long as you don't squeeze her." And he goes, I was watching you play, trying to figure out the chords and the notes you're playing. You're playing in this weird style," and he kind of quizzes his guitar knowledge, gives him the guitar. He's playing a similar thing, but his version of it. So he actually does know what he's talking about. Once again, it's total guitar nerd wank scene, but it's great because the technicality and the authenticity is there. Woody jumps in with his banjo. He's sliding the capo down. Jesse's got the slide on the finger. It's a great scene. If you're not into guitars, you're probably not going to get a lot out of it, but if you're into guitars, you're definitely going to get a kick out of that scene. This leads into the transition into electric. Ultimately, the conflict comes down to the Newport Folk Festival. Woody's one of the organisers. There's a big debate with a board of folk organisers and the Folk Association of America. They're talking about artists to include in, I think, the Folk Hall of Fame, and who's going to play on the bill. It's an up-and-coming guy that gets rejected because he's too electric, and it's a very old-school, stuck-up crowd. They're very rigid, and they're talking about Dylan. He goes, Dylan can play as long as he plays acoustic, but none of that electric shit. Woody stands up for him. But there's this tension around what's Bob going to play. Is he going to go acoustic? Is he going to go electric? Is he going to give the fans what they want? Or is he going to fucking defy expectations and piss everyone off? There's a cool scene. There's one of his band members is buying this loud shirt. He sees Woody through the window. They get talking, and he's trying to get out of Bob. What's he going to play? Is he going to go along with the folk train and support folk music, or is he going to do his own thing? And Newport Festival is really cool. I really like that scene. He takes Sylvia down on the bike. Johnny Cash is in town. There's a cool scene with him and Johnny the morning after. I think it's like the first day or something of the festival. The Newport Festival has been running for 5 years at this point. I'm pretty sure it's the same place where he had played his first big gigs with Joan. They're all staying at this hotel. It's a Nordic-themed hotel. It looked really cool too. There's a party around this pool. And at this point, Bob's really into like the next big thing, which is electric music. He mentions a band, The Kinks. He loves that electric sound, that early British rock. I suppose in a way you could also call Bob Dylan like a bit of a punk, not so much the music, but that attitude at defying authority and convention and doing your own thing. So Sylvia at this point has left. She's got jealous at one of the festivals and decided to leave. And Chalamet does such a good job of the different stages of Bob Dylan. At this stage, he's wearing the sunglasses, he's got the fuzzy hair, he's got the tailored leather jacket, his clothes are better, he's smoking a lot more, but he's really reclusive and he's gone all weird. He's with his band, and there's still this contention of what he's going to play. They try to get Johnny to talk to him, and he explains to Johnny about, they want me to play this acoustic stuff, and Johnny says to him, Johnny's been a big supporter of him throughout the film, and obviously in real life, who's really played well by Boyd Holbrook. And this is the second movie with Johnny Cash that Mangold has directed. For obviously the first being Walk the Line with Joaquin. It would have been cool if they could get Joaquin back, but Boyd Holbrook does a really good job, even though he's physically a little different to Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was not that tall, I don't think. He had a bit more of a rounder face, where Boyd Holbrook is like 6'3". He's got a thinner face, but he does a really good job with the black hair, and they've changed his nose or his chin or something to make him look more like Johnny Cash, and he sings in it as well. So he says, fuck what they say. I want to hear you play electric. The promoters try to talk to him. He's trying to get to Sylvia before she gets the ferry and gets out of Rhode Island. There's a really cool scene with him saying bye to her through this chain link fence. It's a very heartbreaking scene, actually. It's because at that moment, he hasn't been that affectionate to her. He's not the typical guy to say, he loves her or anything like that. And at that moment, you really get the sense that he does actually love her, and she was the one, and even maybe some of the songs were probably about her and all that bullshit with Joan. Whether she knew or not, I think deep down she does, and I think that's what causes her to run away. But yeah, like I said, this abstract love story kind of underpins the film. Yeah, that moment when his fingers are on the chain link fence, I think he realises that he's pushed her too far, and he realises the mistake he's made. Another guitar nerd thing I noticed is he has long, dirty nails. He's got long fingernails for your finger picking, which is another little attention to detail, especially if you're a guitar player. The promoters are getting worried about what's he going to play. Is he going to upset the established order of the folk festival? Is he going to go electric? Is he going to go play acoustic? So they send Woody over to his motel room to talk some sense into him and to try to get an answer out of him. Woody gives him a parable about how folk is nearly there, and if enough people get their teaspoons and add some sand to, I can't remember what the fucking word he used, what the metaphor was, but if enough people add sand to the box, eventually it's going to be level. He says to Bob, you've turned up with a shovel. Bob still doesn't give up what he's going to do. Is he going to play electric? Is he going to go acoustic? Ultimately, he's going to do what he wants to do. He's going to feed the artist and not the audience and the demand for the popular songs. Again, as I was saying about when I saw Iron Maiden, like I wasn't too familiar with their newer stuff, but when they play the old stuff, the feeling of when you first heard that song comes back, and then I really got into it a bit more, especially when like the Trooper came on, Run to the Hills, 2 Minutes to Midnight, like those classic Iron Maiden songs. That's what really like got a lot of people going. I saw Korn a few months ago, early December, and that was all older songs from the first 2 or 3 albums, and it was just fucking hit after hit. No new stuff, just a lot of older classic Korn songs, which is really cool. I can see both sides. Everyone wants to see their favourite band play their favourite songs, which are usually the older songs. But the bands want to play the newer songs to test them out, and they probably get bored of playing the same old stuff all the time. So I kind of get Bob's perspective as well, just playing the new stuff and keeping the music fresh and always playing newer stuff. So the night has arrived, the 1965 Newport Folk Festival. Bob's the closing act. The group before Bob Dylan goes on is a Texas work gang group or something like that. I can't remember the name, but the song is called Hammer Ring. I've never heard it before. It's a fucking cool song. There's these guys hitting wooden logs with axes to get this beat. It's basically just a couple of guys singing, I think maybe a guitar or something like that. Really old school, basic, primitive music, but it's really effective. It's a really cool song. So the moment has come. The fans are stomping their feet and cheering and wanting Bob Dylan and his band to come out. Johnny says to him, he goes, fuck these people. I want to hear you sing the new stuff. Pats him on the back. Woody and the promoters are all watching from the side of the stage, arms crossed, gritting their teeth, chewing their nails, wondering what is he going to sing. And he goes up electric, starts singing one of his new songs, and the crowd fucking boos him, starts throwing stuff at the band, but he doesn't care. He keeps singing. The promoters are livid. He plays the next song, same thing. The promoters have had enough. They're going to pull the plug and shut the festival down. The fans are starting to get rowdy, which is a bit disrespectful. Like, even if a band I loved, or even if a band I didn't like was playing songs that I didn't think they would sing, I would never throw anything or complain. It's their show after all. Like I said, you want to hear the hits and the songs you love, the classics, but what's the harm in hearing something a bit different? Woody has a bit of a meltdown. He goes to try to pull the plug. One of the guys in the band, I think he's like the manager, he goes to the control board and says, don't let anybody touch it. You have to keep the show going. And Woody comes up to try to turn the music off, and they wouldn't let him, and he's walking back and he sees that it's power box, very old school power box with some chords in it. Nothing compared to like the equipment they use in modern day concerts. He sees the axe from the Hammer Ring group. He goes to grab a axe, where he's confronted by his wife, who's been a big supporter of Bob since the early days, since he first came home with Woody in the beginning of the film. He comes to his senses. His agent gets into a fist fight with the folk festival promoter, which is pretty funny. There's a huge commotion backstage. The fans are getting rowdy. He sings another electric song before leaving the stage. Things are getting thrown at him. The fans want to hear some of the older songs. He's about to leave. Johnny's backstage with him. He's got his acoustic guitar. He looks at him. He holds the guitar up. Give him one acoustic song. So he grabs the guitar, goes back on stage, plays a song. Everybody loses their minds, which concludes the concert. And, he plays the Newport Festival the way he wanted to, electric. There's a real touching scene when he goes to visit Woody one last time. Throughout the film, he's made sporadic visits to him. And there's a scene where Woody gives Pete his harmonica to give to Bob, which he ends up using. And towards the end of the film, he comes back to visit him one last time, and he goes to return the harmonica, and he doesn't take it back. He kind of motions to him that it's his. He plays him a song, tears in his eyes, and I tell you what, Scott McNairy, very underrated actor. He was great. He's one of the standouts in the film. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, but what he does with it is so impactful. He has no lines. He basically is sitting in a hospital gown in a bed or a chair. He hardly moves or does anything, but the power and the emotion he conveys just through his eyes and limited facial expressions, because his face is paralyzed, just through eyes and tears and a couple of grumbled moans here and there, is exceptional. Everyone in this movie was standout. I absolutely loved it. I'm a huge fan of Bob Dylan, but even if I wasn't, I think I'd still love this film. Chalamet, just fucking force of nature, that guy. He was Bob Dylan. The way he talked, the way he acted, even the way he played guitar. So all in all, A Complete Unknown is my favourite film of the year so far. I know it's only January, but I absolutely loved it. Out of 5 stars, I'd give it 5 out of 5. I was really fucking blown away by it. It just, the writing, the directing, the music, the pacing, the editing, everything about it is just top notch. A Complete Unknown and Elvis are my favourite musical biopics. Like I said before, they're kind of hit or miss. Yes, it's about the music, but it's also about the writing process and how he revolutionised folk, how he came up with the songs and some of the meanings. It's more about the poetry and him being a poet than being just a singer. But it's also a complex, deep and dark character study at the same time. And I think that James Mangold really cleverly captures that and how Bob views the world. There's a scene where him and Sylvia have just seen a movie. They're having dinner afterwards discussing the film. She has one point of view about one character in the film, one of the main characters, and he has this complete opposite way of seeing the character. You have these two polar opposites. You have the way most people see things, and you have the way Bob views things through the lens of a musical poet. Not to get too pretentious, but yeah, he's a poet. Like I said, I think he's one of the best of this day and age, or any. And I was really blown away by how the film really gets that across. And it just isn't about the music or about the singer. And how it just encompasses all the little details, the guitar playing, the writing. Because I love the focus on the notebooks. He's always got a notebook and a pencil on him. In recent years, this is something I've been really into. Keeping a journal and a notebook and writing things down. Even if it's nonsensical shit, just reminders, things like that. I've written podcast shows in books and notes and stuff. That's probably a lot of podcasters do, but I have a podcast journal I keep, and just keep yourself on track and get ideas out there. The scene with his desk, seeing all these notebooks and the scrapbook and all his past and his life on this desk, it was a really cool and creative way of telling that backstory about him without needing 35 minutes of screen time to run through ages 1 to 19. Just how he enters the film, a young man travelling in the back of a car, finding his way through New York and becoming the legendary poet and musician that he is today. I've had the privilege of seeing Bob Dylan play live. He came to my hometown, when was that? Over 10 years ago. I think that was 2014. It was August. I went with my dad, my brother, my brother's girlfriend, and it was one of the best shows I've ever been to. He had his full band, he played a grand piano, and just like in the movie, he didn't play all the classic Bob Dylan songs either. He played a lot of them towards the end of the concert, but he had some new stuff out, I'm pretty sure. He's produced over 55 albums in his career, and he's still touring, which is incredible at 83 years old. He had an album out recently, I'm pretty sure at the time. It was like him playing the piano, he had backup singers, like the saxophone player, double bass. It's kind of like a return to like the classic big band type of vibe. He had the tuxedo with the open tie and the hat. He played a lot of new songs, but there was a decent amount of older songs throughout the concert. Then he came out and he did a 3 or 4 song encore that blew everybody away. What did he play? I think Times Are Changing, Blowing in the Wind, and the last song was All Along the Watchtower. And yeah, it was fucking incredible. Everyone lost their mind when that came on, me included. I still vividly remember that. I actually really regret selling my Bob Dylan tour t-shirt from that night. I think I'm going to try to find one similar on eBay and buy it back. I really needed the money at the time, but yeah, I really regret it. But going back to the film, all in all, outstanding directing, acting, writing, the music was brilliant. I stayed to the end of the credits, hearing Timothee Chalamet's versions of Bob Dylan songs play out in the credits. I thought, well, I'm only going to see this movie once in the cinema. What other chance am I going to get to hear 3 Bob Dylan songs in a cinema with surround sound? My local cinema, the big cinema number 1, has Crick's surround sound, which is really, really cool. It's high quality sound. It can be a bit loud sometimes, but it's great for action and big epic films, especially ones with lots of music in it. So I was really hoping that we're going to get that cinema for it, and we did. There's like 3 cut down songs. I noticed in the film, when they play the songs, they play a decent amount of them. Some of the songs are played in their entirety, others are kind of cut down. You know how you think in movies, you think they're playing the full song, but it's like they have the start, but then they kind of cut out the verses and kind of go to the chorus and maybe cut out the second or third verse and compress the song a bit, but it seems like one song, but it's only like 2 minutes, but then when you go listen to it afterwards, it's like 4 or 5. Anyway, yeah, all in all, fantastic film, my favourite of the year so far. I really, really enjoyed it. I will be buying it on Blu-ray, as well as probably the soundtrack, even though I've got a lot of Dylan albums. Really want to see it again. There's a lot of things I think I missed in it. It really got me interested in that time period of music. I want to go back and listen to all those artists and the ones I haven't heard of prior to the film. Like I heard of Woody Guthrie. I just not very familiar with his music. I've probably heard a couple of songs, but not a lot. And Pete Seeger, I want to listen to some of his stuff. Some of the Dylan stuff I haven't listened to. I mean, it's 55 albums. It's a lot of albums. And some of the guys during that time, I want to go back and listen to Johnny Cash again and watch Walk the Line. Yeah, great film, 5 stars, great directing, great performances. Chalamet, he should win an Oscar for it, in my opinion. But knowing how fucking woke the Oscars are, that Emily Perez film will probably fucking win everything. I mean, Denis Villeneuve didn't even get nominated for Best Director for Dune Part 2, which is a fucking crime against cinema. It is absolutely outrageous that he did not get nominated for Best Director. Him and Nolan are the best directors of their generation. There's no one even close to them. Don't want to hear an argument. There's no one as good as Nolan or Villeneuve making films from their generation. Obviously, you've got James Cameron and Steven Spielberg and Ridley Scott still making epic films. Those two, for their age bracket, are the best in the business. Excellent film. I highly recommend it. And that concludes the review of A Complete Unknown.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Turn your dial to find the frequency of the past.
Captain Advice.
Where the classic stories of mysteries, sci-fi, thrillers, and suspense are found waiting to be heard once again.
Another case for Nick Carter, Master Detective.
You'll find a variety of those stories here, in their original form, where each episode takes you to another place or time.
The Man of Bronze, Doc Savage.
But only when you find the mystery frequency. Available everywhere.
The shadow knows.
And that brings us to the end of the show. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. If you'd like to support Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like, share them around with your friends. You can download and listen to the Truth Tank on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Castbox, YouTube, Pandora, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell people you think might like the show. Help share it around and get it out there. If you want to help the show grow, you can leave a 5-star rating and review. Each review and rating helps the show get found and get pushed up through the ratings. Once again, thank you for listening to the end, and I'll be back in the next week or two with a brand new episode. I hope you enjoyed this one, but until then, I'm the Tank, this is the Truth to tell.
Thank you.